I'm Leo, I'm 32 years old, and at my own housewarming party, my older sister tried to steal my house right in front of my family and friends. Before I tell you about the moment that silence fell over the room and everything changed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far a story can travel. The air in our newly restored dining room was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary chicken and fresh paint, a combination that, to me, smelled like victory. Laughter echoed off the high, 14-foot ceilings we'd spent weeks plastering and perfecting, each swirl in the plaster a testament to our aching backs and shared determination. My wife, Clara, was glowing, her smile lighting up the room more than the vintage Edison bulbs we'd so carefully chosen for the chandelier. She caught my eye from across the room and raised her glass in a silent toast. We'd done it. Our friends, our neighbors, even my boss, David, were all there. David clapped me on the back, a wide grin on his face. Leo, I knew you were a great designer, but this is a masterpiece. You see potential where others just see work. His words warmed me more than the champagne. For years, I'd worked diligently in the background, and to have my vision, my work, acknowledged so publicly felt incredible. Our neighbors, the Millers, an older couple from across the street, brought over a homemade apple pie. We're so thrilled to have some life back in the old Pendleton place, Mrs. Miller said, squeezing my hand. It was more than a party. It was the culmination of a dream we had nurtured in the cramped confines of our tiny apartment for years. It was supposed to be the best night of our lives, the start of a new, peaceful chapter. And then my sister, Amelia, stood up. She tapped her fork against her crystal glass, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the happy chatter like a shard of glass. Every head turned towards her. She had that look on her face, the one I'd known my whole life, the one that always preceded a storm. It was the look she got right before a competition. A calculated, predatory gleam in her eyes that meant she wasn't just planning to win. She was planning to annihilate her opponent. She was standing by the grand, marble fireplace we had painstakingly restored, positioning herself as if she already owned the place, a queen addressing her court. I'd like to make an announcement, she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My mother beamed, nudging my father beside her, probably thinking Amelia was about to give a heartwarming toast about sibling love and family pride. My father leaned forward, a proud smile already forming on his face, always ready to applaud his golden child. Clara's hand found mine under the table. Her grip was like a vice, her knuckles white. She had seen that look on Amelia's face before, too. She knew, just like I did, that this was no toast. Amelia's eyes scanned the room, deliberately passing over me before coming back to land on my face with a triumphant smirk. I've been doing some digging, she began, her voice gaining a hard, metallic strength. And I've spoken to a lawyer. It seems the sale of this beautiful home wasn't exactly legal. A nervous murmur rippled through our guests. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a steady, heavy drumbeat of dread. David's smile vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. So, Amelia declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality, from this moment on, I am the legal representative for the rightful owners. I am the owner of this house. Gasps filled the room. My mother's smile faltered, her face crumpling in confusion. My father looked as if he'd been slapped. Amelia wasn't done. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at me, the diamond on her hand catching the light. And he, she announced to the stunned crowd, is no longer welcome here. Get out. The world seemed to slow down, the sound muffling as if I were underwater. Every eye was on me. My vision narrowed until all I could see was my sister's hateful, victorious face. Clara's grip on my hand was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. But I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I had been preparing for a storm, and now it was here. As Amelia stood there, soaking in her moment of perceived triumph, I closed my eyes and began to count in my head. 3. I took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of rosemary and betrayal filling my lungs. 2. I pictured the contents of the heavy leather portfolio sitting in my office, each document a shield. 1. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence took over the room. And in that silence, I opened my eyes, met my sister's gaze, and gave her a small, calm smile. The show was just getting started. To understand why I didn't fall apart in that moment, you have to understand my entire life. You have to understand what it's like to grow up as the supporting cast in someone else's movie. In my family, the star was always unequivocally Amelia. She was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I was born, the roles were set. Amelia was the prodigy, the brilliant one, the one destined for greatness. I was the other one, the quiet one, the reliable one. Our childhood home in suburban Massachusetts was her stage, and my parents were her most devoted audience. Their love wasn't conditional, but their attention certainly was. I remember when I was in 4th grade, I worked for weeks on a solar system model for the school science fair. It was my passion project. I used marbles for the smaller planets, a painted kickball for Jupiter, and I even saved up my allowance to buy a small motor from a hobby shop to make the planet's orbit a lightbulb sun. I was so proud of it, of the mechanics and the artistry. I got a blue ribbon, first place in my grade. I ran home, clutching it in my hand, my heart bursting with a pure, simple joy. I found my parents in the living room. "Mom! Dad! Look!" I shouted, holding up the ribbon for them to see. My mom glanced over from the newspaper. "Oh, that's lovely, honey. Good job. Put it on the fridge." My dad grunted his approval without looking up from the TV, where a golf tournament was on. Just then, Amelia waltzed in, holding a piece of paper. "I got the lead in the school play," she announced, striking a dramatic pose. Instantly, it was like a switch had been flipped. My parents were on their feet. My dad muted the TV. My mom dropped her paper. "Oh, my darling. That's wonderful. Tell us everything. What's the play? Who are you playing? We have to call Grandma." My blue ribbon suddenly felt cheap and flimsy, a forgotten toy. I just stood there, watching as they fawned over her. My little victory completely erased in the blinding light of her spotlight. I quietly went to my room and tucked the ribbon into the back of a drawer where it stayed for years. That was the pattern. My steady, quiet achievements were like stones dropped into a pond. They made a small splash and then sank without a trace. Amelia's accomplishments were like fireworks, demanding everyone's attention, lighting up the whole sky. It wasn't just about grades or awards. She turned everything into a competition I didn't even know I was in. One year, for my 10th birthday, all I wanted was a new 10-speed bike. I had been talking about it for months, circling it in catalogs. My birthday came and my parents got it for me. I was ecstatic. For 2 weeks, that bike was my entire world. Then, Amelia, who had shown zero interest in cycling, suddenly decided she needed a better one. She complained that her old bike was for kids and that all her friends had mountain bikes. For 2 weeks, she sulked and sighed dramatically around the house until my parents gave in. They took her to a specialty sports store and bought her a top-of-the-line mountain bike with 24 gears and shock absorbers. A bike that cost 3 times as much as mine. My simple, wonderful 10-speed suddenly looked like a clumsy relic. That was her specialty. Taking my joy and finding a way to eclipse it. My parents enabled it, always. "We have to support Amelia's passions, Leo," my dad would say, as if my own passions were less valid. "She has real potential." The implication was clear. I didn't. They weren't cruel people, not intentionally. They just had a blind spot the size of a planet, and that planet was Amelia. They paid for her expensive summer camps for aspiring actresses, her designer clothes for school dances, her first car, a brand new convertible. Her college fund was a topic of constant, proud discussion at the dinner table. When I asked about mine, they told me to focus on getting a scholarship. That state school was a perfectly fine option for someone practical like me. Practical. That was their code word for not special. It taught me to be self-reliant. It had to. I got a part-time job at a grocery store when I was 16. I learned to save, to budget, to work for what I wanted because I knew no one was going to hand it to me. While Amelia was at the mall spending my parents' money, I was bagging groceries, the smell of disinfectant and stale bread clinging to my clothes. The experience taught me the value of a dollar earned. a lesson she never had to learn. There were moments, rare flashes of genuine sisterhood, that made it all the more confusing and painful. I remember one night in high school, my first real girlfriend broke up with me over the phone. I was devastated, convinced my life was over. I came home and just lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that unique, hollow ache of teenage heartbreak. There was a soft knock on my door. It was Amelia. She came in and sat on the edge of my bed, not saying anything for a long time. The silence was comfortable. Then she just put a hand on my shoulder. "She was an idiot anyway," she said softly. "You're too good for her." And her laugh was really annoying. I let out a small, watery chuckle. For that one night, she wasn't the star and I wasn't the shadow. We were just a brother and a sister, and she was being kind. But those moments were like oases in a desert, rare and fleeting. By morning, the competition would be back on, and she'd be pointing out a new pimple on my face or making a sarcastic comment about my choice of shirt. Growing up like that does something to you. It instills in you a deep, gnawing fear that you'll never be good enough. It makes you crave validation while also teaching you not to expect it. My biggest fear wasn't failing. It was that even if I succeeded, no one would notice. Or worse, my success would somehow be twisted into another victory for her. It's a heavy weight to carry, that feeling of being permanently second best in the eyes of the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. And it was that weight, that constant, grinding pressure, that drove me to build a life so different from hers. A life that was so undeniably my own that she could never cast her shadow over it. Or so I thought. After high school, Amelia and I went our separate ways, and the differences between us became even sharper, like two rivers flowing from the same mountain but carving entirely different canyons on their way to the sea. Amelia went to a prestigious, expensive private university, the one my parents had been saving for since she was born. She majored in marketing and quickly found her place among the elite, joining the right sorority, dating the right guys, and mastering the art of networking. She was a natural. She came home for holidays with stories of lavish parties and weekend trips to Europe, always dressed in designer labels my parents would proudly point out to relatives. "That's a Diane von Furstenberg," my mom would whisper to my aunt. It must have cost a fortune. 2 years after graduation, she married Richard, a successful investment banker who was just as ambitious and image-conscious as she was. He was the perfect accessory to the life she was building. Their wedding was a massive, extravagant affair at a country club, an event that my parents cashed out a portion of their retirement savings to help pay for. It was featured in a local society magazine, with a glossy photo of the happy couple. My role was to be an usher, smile for the pictures, and make sure I didn't get in the way of the photographer. Soon after, my parents helped them with a hefty down payment on a luxury condo in the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman named Stan. Amelia had officially made it. My path was quieter, paved with grit instead of gold. I went to a state university and worked my way through it. I had 2, sometimes 3, part-time jobs at a time: barista at the campus coffee shop, library assistant shelving books in the dead of night, delivery driver navigating city traffic. I did whatever it took to avoid the crushing weight of student debt. I studied graphic design, a field where my quiet, meticulous nature was a strength, not a weakness. I learned to find satisfaction not in applause, but in the quiet pride of a job well done, of a logo perfectly balanced, of a color palette that sang. My dream wasn't a luxury condo or a fancy car. It was simple, almost painfully so. I wanted a home, not just a place to live, but a home with history, with character, a place where I could put down roots and feel like I truly belonged. A place that couldn't be overshadowed, that felt solid and real. That's what I was thinking about the day I met Clara. It was at a weekend art fair in the park. To make some extra money and as a form of therapy, I was selling some of my watercolor paintings, mostly landscapes and old, forgotten buildings. It was a hobby, a way for me to de-stress and create something just for me. Clara stopped at my little booth, and her eyes weren't just looking, they were seeing. She didn't just glance. She studied each painting. "You really capture the light," she said, pointing to a small painting of an old, forgotten barn with a sagging roof. It feels peaceful, like it has stories to tell. We talked for an hour, right there in the middle of the bustling park. She was a software developer, logical and brilliant, but with an artist's soul. She understood my quiet ambition, my need to build something real and lasting. We fell in love not with a sudden, fiery passion, but with the slow, steady warmth of two people recognizing a home in each other. Our wedding was the polar opposite of Amelia's. We got married in a small ceremony at a public garden with only 30 of our closest friends and family. It was perfect. Of course, Amelia showed up wearing a white lace dress. It wasn't a wedding gown, but it was close enough to make a statement. She claimed it was ivory, but everyone knew what she was doing. I saw the look on my mother's face. A flicker of annoyance, quickly replaced by her usual indulgent smile for Amelia. I just squeezed Clara's hand, pulled her close, and focused on her. It was our day, and I refused to let Amelia make it hers. For the first few years of our marriage, Clara and I lived in a tiny, one-bedroom apartment with questionable plumbing and paper-thin walls, where we could hear our neighbors arguing about their custody agreement. We lived frugally, a skill I had mastered long ago. We packed our own lunches, drove a 10-year-old car, and put every spare dollar into a high-yield savings account we nicknamed the Dream House Fund. Amelia loved to comment on our lifestyle whenever she graced us with a visit. She'd walk into our apartment, look around with a pitying expression, and say things like, "Oh, this is so quaint. It must be so freeing to not care about material things." It was a backhanded compliment, a way of calling us poor while pretending to be enlightened. She'd talk about her and Richard's upcoming ski trip to Aspen or the new promotion Richard got, which came with a huge bonus and a better title. We'd just smile and nod, knowing we were working towards something that meant more to us than a luxury vacation or a fancy title. We were building a future, not just an image. The dream of owning a home became our shared obsession, our North Star. We'd spend weekends driving through old neighborhoods, pointing out Victorian houses and charming craftsman bungalows. We'd talk about raising a family, about having a garden where Clara could grow tomatoes, about creating a space that was entirely ours. It was this dream that kept us going through the long hours and the tight budgets. It was our quiet rebellion against the world of appearances that Amelia lived in. We didn't need a stage or an audience. We just needed a foundation, and we were building it one brick, one saved dollar at a time. It was a slow, patient process, but we knew, deep down, that it would be worth it. We were proving, mostly to ourselves, that a life of substance was worth infinitely more than a life of style. The opportunity, when it finally came, arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet conversation over a cup of tea. Came from the most unexpected place. Through my graphic design work, I had a client, a sweet, 87-year-old woman named Mrs. Eleanor Pendleton. I was helping her design a small, self-published book of her late husband's poetry. We spent hours together in her home, a magnificent, slightly faded Victorian house with a wraparound porch, intricate gingerbread trim, and a beautiful, overgrown garden that hinted at decades of love and care. I fell in love with it instantly. It had the kind of character and soul that you just can't find in new construction. Felt alive. One afternoon, as we were finalizing the book cover, Mrs. Pendleton looked at me over the rim of her teacup, her blue eyes still sharp and intelligent. "Leo," she said, her voice a little shaky with age, "I have to sell this house. It's getting to be too much for me to manage alone." My heart sank a little for her. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Mrs. Pendleton. It's such a wonderful home." She waved a dismissive hand, though I saw the sadness in her eyes. "Oh, it's time. My old bones aren't what they used to be. But I can't bear the thought of some developer tearing it down to build one of those modern monstrosities with no charm." She paused, her gaze direct. "You love this house, don't you? I see the way you look at the woodwork, the way you touched the stained glass window by the door last week." I felt my face flush, caught in my admiration. "It's a beautiful home. It's the kind of house I've always dreamed of." A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "I have no children, dear," she said softly. "And my nephew, Thomas, is a professor settled on the West Coast. He has his own life. I'd rather see my home go to someone who will love it properly than sell it for the highest price to a stranger. She then made an offer that made my jaw drop. An offer that felt like a gift from the universe. She offered to sell us the house in a private sale, well below the market value, with seller financing to help us avoid a massive bank loan we might not have qualified for. It was a lifeline, a miracle we never could have anticipated. There are conditions, she added, her expression serious. I'd want you to sign a preservation covenant, a legal promise that you won't destroy the historical character. And I'd like to have a life interest agreement, allowing me to live in the small garden apartment downstairs for as long as I'm able. I'd pay a small rent, of course. Clara and I didn't even have to think about it. It was perfect. We would have our dream home, and we could also make sure Mrs. Pendleton, a woman we had grown very fond of, was safe and looked after. The entire purchase process was handled by her longtime family lawyer, a kind and thorough man named Marcus Thorne. He drew up all the paperwork, explaining every clause to us with patience, ensuring everything was ironclad and legal. The day we got the keys was one of the happiest of my life. The house was ours. Then came the real work. For the next 6 months, Clara and I poured every ounce of our energy, time, and savings into that house. It wasn't just renovating, we were resurrecting it. We learned how to plaster walls from YouTube tutorials, how to refinish 100-year-old hardwood floors, and how to reglaze old, wavy glass windows. We spent weekends covered in dust and paint, collapsing into bed exhausted but exhilarated. We stripped away layers of yellowed wallpaper to reveal beautiful, original woodwork. We found an old, boarded-up fireplace behind a false wall in the living room. Every discovery felt like the house was sharing its secrets with us, trusting us. It became more than just a building. It was our partner, our project, our future. We had a real challenge when a storm revealed a leak in the roof, and we spent a frantic weekend learning how to patch slate tiles, a skill I never thought I'd need. Of course, I had to tell my family. I called my parents first. They were happy for me, in their own reserved, cautious way. "That's a lot of house, Leo," my dad said, his voice laced with skepticism. "Hope you know what you're getting into. Old houses can be a money pit." Then I called Amelia. Her reaction was unsettling. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. "A Victorian?" she finally said, her voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "Where did you get the money for that?" I explained the incredibly fortunate situation with Mrs. Pendleton. Instead of being happy for me, she became an interrogator. Her questions were oddly specific and had a sharp, legalistic edge that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Seller financing? What's the interest rate? Who's her lawyer? What's his name? Did you get an independent appraisal? What's this life interest thing? Does that mean she can live there forever and you can't sell? What about the inheritance rights of her nephew? Is he okay with this? It sounds like you're taking advantage of her." The last accusation stung. "Of course we're not, Amelia. It was her idea. Everything is being handled by her lawyer." "You should get your own lawyer," she insisted. "This whole thing sounds fishy. I'll ask Richard's firm. They handle estate law." "No," I said, cutting her off. "That's not necessary. We trust Marcus Thorne." I brushed it off as her typical competitive nature, her inability to see me succeed without suspicion. I told myself she just couldn't stand to see me have something she didn't, something real and earned. I had no idea how far she was willing to take it. I was so wrapped up in the joy of building our home that I didn't see the storm gathering on the horizon. I didn't realize that, to my sister, my dream home wasn't a home at all. It was a prize. And it was a prize she was determined to win, no matter the cost. Once the major renovations were complete, when the scent of paint no longer overpowered the smell of fresh brewed coffee in the morning, Clara and I decided to host a housewarming party. We wanted to celebrate, to fill the rooms with life and laughter, and show everyone the fruits of our non-stop, 6-month labor of love. We sent out invitations to our friends, colleagues, and our new neighbors. And, of course, to our family. Amelia's RSVP came back suspiciously fast via a text message. Of course we'll be there. Can't wait to see the project, she wrote. The word project was in quotation marks. A subtle little dig that I tried to ignore. A suggestion that our home was just a quirky hobby, not a serious accomplishment like her professionally designed condo. The day of the party, our house was buzzing with warmth and happiness. A cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves outside, but inside, everything was bright and warm. People flowed from the living room to the dining room and out onto the newly repaired porch. Everyone was so complimentary, admiring the restored woodwork and the original details we'd worked so hard to preserve. "You've brought it back to life," our neighbor, Mr. Miller, said, clapping me on the shoulder. For the first time in my own space, I felt a deep, uncomplicated sense of pride. Amelia and Richard arrived late, of course. It was a calculated entrance, designed to make sure all eyes were on them, an hour after the party had hit its stride. Amelia was dressed in a sleek, black designer dress that probably cost more than our new refrigerator. Richard looked bored and superior, swirling a glass of expensive-looking red wine he'd brought himself because he couldn't be sure what we'd be serving. "Leo, darling," Amelia said, air-kissing me while her eyes scanned the room critically, her gaze cataloging every detail, every potential flaw. What a monumental effort. I gave tours of the house in small groups and Amelia tagged along with one, but she wasn't looking at the big picture. She was taking pictures with her phone, not of the whole room but of strange, specific details. The corner of a window frame, a section of the plumbing under the sink, the electrical panel in the basement. It was unnerving. "Just getting some ideas for our next renovation," she said with a breezy smile when she caught me watching her. But her eyes told a different story. They were cold, assessing. Throughout the party, she undermined our choices with quiet, poisonous comments to other guests, just loud enough for me to overhear as I passed by. To a friend of Clara's, she whispered, "The paint color is a bit bold, don't you think? Very amateur." To my boss, David, she remarked, "I hope they had that foundation checked properly. Old houses can be such a money pit, a terrible investment." She was planting seeds of doubt, trying to tarnish our accomplishment in the eyes of our friends. Later, I saw her talking to the Millers, our new neighbors, on the porch. Her expression was one of deep, feigned concern. I walked over, and the conversation stopped abruptly. Mrs. Miller looked uncomfortable. "Amelia was just asking about dear Mrs. Pendleton," she explained, her voice a little too bright. "About her health, and her nephew. So thoughtful of her to be concerned." Cold knot formed in my stomach. Amelia had never been thoughtful in her life without an ulterior motive. Why was she so interested in Mrs. Pendleton's nephew? The breaking point, the moment my unease curdled into genuine fear, came when I went to my home office to grab my phone charger. The room was at the back of the house, quiet and away from the party. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and saw Amelia standing by my desk. My desk, where all our important documents were filed. She had a file open, and as I walked in, she quickly shoved a sheaf of papers into her massive, expensive purse and slammed the file shut. She was so engrossed, she hadn't heard me approach. "Amelia, what are you doing in here?" I demanded, my voice sharper and louder than I intended. She jumped, startled, a flicker of pure panic in her eyes before she masked it with indignation. "God, Leo, you scared me. I was just admiring your workspace," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It's so cozy." She brushed past me and out of the room, leaving the scent of her strong, cloying perfume hanging in the air like a guilty confession. My hands were shaking as I walked over to the desk. The file she had been looking at was the one from the house closing. The one containing copies of the deed, the sales agreement, the appraisal, everything. I frantically thumbed through it. What had she taken? The papers seemed to be in order, but were there copies missing? What was she looking for? I went back out to the party, my head spinning. The cheerful noise of the crowd seemed distant and strange. I found Clara and pulled her aside into the kitchen. Amelia was just in my office, going through the house papers. I whispered, my voice tight. "I think she stole something." Clara's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. What? Why would she do that? What could she possibly want? I don't know, I said, the cold knot in my stomach tightening into a block of ice. But something is very wrong. This isn't just jealousy anymore. This is something else. We tried to act normal for the rest of the night, to keep smiling and chatting with our guests. But the happy atmosphere of the party had vanished for me. It was now a ticking clock. I watched my sister across the room. She was laughing with a group of my friends, looking completely at ease, the perfect party guest. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her phone. She was waiting for something. She was planning something. And it was going to happen in my house. On my night. The battle lines had been drawn, and I hadn't even known there was a war. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and tense small talk. Dinner was served, and the conversation around the long dining table we'd built together from reclaimed wood felt strained and artificial to me. I was sitting at one end, with Clara beside me, her presence a small, warm anchor in my sea of anxiety. Amelia and Richard sat directly opposite, and I could feel my sister's eyes on me throughout the meal. She wasn't eating much, merely pushing her food around the plate with her fork. She was whispering intensely to Richard, who looked increasingly agitated, shaking his head and running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Every few minutes, her phone would vibrate on the table beside her, and she'd glance down at it with a little, secret smile that sent a chill down my spine. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for the axe to fall. I had to be ready. Making an excuse about checking on the dessert, I slipped away from the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I walked back to my office. This time, I closed and locked the door behind me. I needed a moment to think, to plan. I opened the filing cabinet, my hands surprisingly steady. I pulled out the original leather portfolio that Marcus Thorne, Mrs. Pendleton's lawyer, had given us upon closing. It contained every single document related to the sale. The original deed with its official stamp, the signed and notarized certificate of capacity for Mrs. Pendleton, the surveyor's report with its detailed maps, and a freshly printed letter of good standing from Marcus Thorne from the State Bar Association that I had requested just last week. On a hunch, I took the portfolio and walked back out, placing it on the small bookshelf in the hallway near the dining room entrance. I partially hid it behind a large potted fern Clara loved. It was close enough to grab in a hurry, but not so obvious that it would draw attention. A weapon in plain sight. Then, I made 2 quiet phone calls, using the downstairs powder room for privacy. The first was to Marcus Thorne himself. I had invited him to the party as a guest. A genuine thank you for all his help and guidance. He was an older, distinguished gentleman with a calming presence, and at that moment, I needed that calm. He was mingling in the living room, discussing politics with a few of my old college friends. I caught his eye and motioned for him to join me in the hall. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice low so no one could overhear. I apologize for pulling you away, but I think my sister is going to try something. She's been asking questions, snooping around my office. I think she's going to publicly contest the sale of the house. Tonight. Marcus didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, his expression grim and serious. I was afraid of this, he said, his voice a low rumble. Her line of questioning when you were in escrow was unusual, aggressive. Don't you worry, Leo. The paperwork is ironclad. We did everything by the book for this very reason. Just stay calm, let her say her piece, and don't engage until she's finished. His steady demeanor was incredibly reassuring. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was an ally. The second call was harder. I had also invited Mrs. Pendleton's real nephew, Thomas. He was a kind, middle-aged history professor who had flown in from Oregon for a conference at the local university and had agreed to stop by. I had wanted him to see the house his aunt loved in such good hands. I found him admiring an old, framed map of the county we'd hung in the hallway. Thomas, I began, feeling awful for dragging him into my family's toxic drama. I need to ask you a huge favor, and I'm so sorry to do this. My sister, she might say some things tonight. About you, about your aunt. It might get ugly. I need you to just listen, and if I call on you, would you be willing to set the record straight. Thomas looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. He adjusted his glasses and studied my face. My Aunt Eleanor told me you were a good man, Leo. She also told me your sister was a piece of work. He gave me a firm nod. Eleanor trusted you, so I trust you. Whatever you need, I'm here. With my pieces in place, my defenders waiting in the wings, I returned to the dining room. I felt a strange sense of clarity, of focus. The fear was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, hard resolve. The main course was being cleared away by the caterers we'd hired. The air was thick with anticipation. It felt like the heavy, oppressive stillness before a thunderstorm, when the sky turns a dark, bruised purple and the air crackles with electricity. Everyone could feel it. The laughter had died down to nervous murmurs. Clara looked at me as I sat down, her eyes wide with worry. I gave her a small, reassuring nod and squeezed her hand under the table. We're ready, I mouthed. Amelia was watching me, a smug, predatory look on her face. She thought I was a cornered animal. She thought I was the same little brother she could push around and steal a birthday bike from. She had no idea that for the past several weeks, ever since her first strange, interrogating phone call, I had been preparing for this exact moment. I had hoped I was wrong. I had hoped my sister, despite a lifetime of casual cruelty, wouldn't be this monstrous. But hope wasn't a strategy. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not in my own home. Not anymore. The dessert plates were set down. Amelia pushed hers away, untouched. She stood up, tapped her glass, and the room fell silent. The storm was finally about to break, and I was standing in the eye of it, perfectly, terrifyingly calm. As I was saying before, Amelia began, her voice echoing in the dead silent room. There are some serious legal issues with the ownership of this property. She had everyone's complete attention. My parents looked horrified, caught between their two children. My friends looked confused, glancing between me and her. Richard, her husband, looked intensely uncomfortable, staring down at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. He knew what was coming and wished he were anywhere else. I've been in contact with Mrs. Pendleton's nephew, Amelia continued, her voice filled with a syrupy, fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. A man named Gregory Wilson, a lovely man, utterly devastated. He was kept completely in the dark about this sale. He had no idea his dear, sweet, mentally frail aunt was being taken advantage of. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the vile accusation hang in the air and poison the atmosphere of our celebration. You see, I have here a medical report I obtained through a private investigator. She held up her phone, though the screen was dark. It states that Eleanor Pendleton was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 3 months before she signed away this house, her most valuable asset. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sharp, unified sound of shock. My mother put a hand to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. This was the heart of her attack, painting me as a monster, a predator who had swindled a vulnerable old woman out of her home. She wasn't of sound mind to make such a decision. Amelia's voice rose, filled with a righteous, theatrical anger. And the man who oversaw this fraudulent transaction, her so-called lawyer, a Mr. Marcus Daniels. She spat the name out, deliberately getting it wrong to add another layer of disrespect. It turns out his license was suspended 6 months ago for professional misconduct. He wasn't even authorized to execute a property transfer. The entire deal was a sham, orchestrated by my brother to enrich himself at the expense of an old woman. She was weaving a masterful web of lies, each one designed to isolate and destroy me, to turn my own friends against me. I glanced at Marcus Thorne, who stood stone-faced by the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. I saw Thomas Pendleton, who was watching Amelia with a look of utter, academic disbelief, as if studying a bizarre and distasteful new species. So, Amelia concluded, turning to face me, her eyes burning with a lifetime of resentment and jealousy. I have been granted power of attorney by the real family, by Gregory. From this moment on, I am acting as the legal representative for the rightful owners of this house. This sale is void. She then delivered her final, devastating lines, a perfectly rehearsed kill shot. My husband and I will be moving in next week to manage the property until it can be properly sold at its full market value. And as for you, Leo, she smiled, a cruel, triumphant curve of her lips. You and your wife have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Get out. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was broken only by my mother's soft sob. Amelia, how could you? He's your brother. But Amelia ignored her. Her eyes were locked on me, waiting for me to break, to scream, to cry, to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I took a slow sip of water. I calmly placed my linen napkin on the table. And then, I stood up. Wow, I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the tense room. That was quite a performance, Amelia. Really. A plus. You hit all the major points. Betrayal, elder abuse, legal corruption. It's very dramatic. You should have gotten the lead in the play after all. The small barb hit its mark. Amelia's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This wasn't the reaction she was expecting. You've clearly put a lot of work into this, I continued, walking slowly towards the bookshelf where the portfolio was hidden. Hired investigators? Talked to lawyers? Or at least, people you thought were lawyers. The problem is, your entire story, this entire elaborate fantasy, is based on a foundation of lies. I reached behind the fern and pulled out the heavy leather portfolio. I walked back to the dining table and placed it down with a solid, definitive thud that made several people jump. You mentioned a nephew, Gregory Wilson? I said, opening the portfolio and taking out the first document. That's very interesting, because Mrs. Pendleton doesn't have a nephew named Gregory. I turned to the man standing quietly in the corner, who had been watching the proceedings with a pained expression. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Thomas Pendleton. He is Mrs. Eleanor Pendleton's one and only nephew. Thomas stepped forward. It's true, he said, his voice the calm, authoritative tone of a professor. I'm Thomas, and I was fully aware of my aunt's decision to sell her home to Leo and Clara. I supported it completely. She wanted the house to go to people who would cherish it, not to the highest bidder. I've never heard of a Gregory Wilson. Amelia's face went pale. No, that's not possible. Gregory sent me copies of his birth certificate, his driver's license. Let's talk about Gregory, I said, pulling out another document. I have a feeling he's the same man who contacted me a month ago, claiming the same story. He's a professional scammer who targets the families of elderly property owners. I hired my own investigator, Amelia. This is a report on him. His real name is Paul Jones. He has a record for fraud in 3 states. I assume you paid him for his cooperation. Amelia was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Richard, her husband, suddenly looked alarmed. He turned to her, his voice a harsh whisper. Amelia, did you pay this guy? You told me he was doing it out of principle. How much did you pay him? She ignored him, her eyes still fixed on me in horror as I continued my methodical demolition of her lies. Now, about Mrs. Pendleton's mental state, I said, pulling out another paper. This is a certificate of capacity, signed by not one, but 2 independent geriatric specialists from University Hospital, dated the week before the sale. It confirms that Mrs. Pendleton was, and is, perfectly competent and of sound mind. I slid the paper across the table. My father picked it up, his hands trembling as he read the official medical report, so different from the forgery my sister had likely acquired. And finally, I said, looking over at Marcus Thorne, Amelia made some very serious accusations against a lawyer she called Marcus Daniels. I believe she was referring to this man, Mr. Marcus Thorne, a respected member of the state bar for 45 years. Marcus stepped forward, his expression as cold as ice. Ms. Matthews, he said to Amelia, his voice booming with authority. My license is, and always has been, in perfect standing. The accusations you just made in front of these witnesses constitute slander, and I assure you, my firm will be in touch. And the documents you claimed to have obtained through a private investigator? He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. My investigator found that you paid a disbarred paralegal $5,000 for forged medical records. That, Ms. Matthews, is a felony. The color drained completely from Amelia's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. She stumbled back a step, grabbing the back of a chair for support. Richard finally snapped. "Amelia, how much?" he yelled, his voice cracking, all pretense of sophistication gone. "How much did you pay the fake nephew?" Amelia looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, her whole body trembling. She whispered a number. I couldn't hear it, but Richard did. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and utter disbelief. 50,000? He choked out, loud enough for the whole room to hear. You paid him $50,000? From our home equity line? Are you insane? We can't afford that. We had to take a second mortgage. He stopped himself, but it was too late. The final, ugly truth was out. The illusion was shattered. And in that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't just jealousy. It was desperation. The fancy car, the designer clothes, the luxury condo. It was all a house of cards, funded by debt. They were drowning. And my beautiful, hard-earned, affordable home was supposed to be their lifeboat. Stealing my house wasn't just a cruel act of sibling rivalry. It was a calculated, criminal business decision. A desperate, illegal gamble that had just spectacularly, publicly, failed. Amelia finally broke. She let out a choked sob and ran from the room. We heard the front door thrown open and then slammed shut. Richard, his face a mask of fury and humiliation, stared at me for a moment, a look of pure hatred in his eyes, before turning and following her. The door slammed shut a second time, the sound echoing the final, brutal end of Amelia's fantasy. The room was silent again, but this time, it was a silence filled with shock and pity. I looked at the faces of my friends, my neighbors, and then I looked at my parents. My mother was crying silently into her hands. My father just looked old, broken, and defeated. He knew in that moment that the perfect, golden image he had of his daughter was a lie. And he knew that he had stood by and let her try to destroy his son. The truth was finally out. It wasn't the triumphant, cheering victory I might have imagined. It was just quiet, sad, and absolute. After Amelia and Richard fled, a strange, awkward pall fell over the party. The celebration was well and truly over. Our guests, not knowing what to say or where to look, began to make their excuses and leave in a quiet procession. They offered hushed words of support, sympathetic looks, and gentle pats on the shoulder. The Millers from next door were the last to go. We're so sorry you had to go through that, Leo, Mrs. Miller said, patting my arm, her eyes filled with genuine compassion. But we're very glad you're our neighbors. You're good people. Soon, it was just me, Clara, and my parents left in the grand dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a party that had turned into a public trial. The half-eaten plates of cake, the abandoned glasses of champagne. It all felt like evidence from a crime scene. The silence was deafening, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. She finally looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Leo, I had no idea, she stammered, her voice weak. I never thought that she could be capable of something so hateful. You didn't, I asked, and the quiet calm I had maintained all night finally began to crack. A lifetime of suppressed anger, of swallowed injustices, started to bubble to the surface. You didn't know? Or you didn't want to know? You saw how she's been my entire life. You saw it every single day. She wasn't born this way tonight, Mom. She was built piece by piece every time you looked the other way. Tonight wasn't a surprise. It was just bigger. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. He had that look he always got when things got messy and emotional. A desire to smooth everything over, to restore order, to pretend it wasn't happening. Now, son, your sister. She's obviously not well. She made a terrible, terrible mistake. But she's still your sister. We're still a family. We need to figure out how to help her. A family? I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded ugly in the quiet room. Is that what this is? You want to talk about helping her? Who was going to help me? A family is supposed to protect each other, support each other. Where was my support tonight, Dad? Where was it when she was calling me a criminal, a fraud, in front of all my friends? You just sat there. You sat there in silence. You were ready to believe her, weren't you? For just a second, you thought, maybe Leo did do something wrong. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the pattern on the tablecloth. That's not fair, Leo. Fair. I shot back, my voice rising, shaking with 30 years of repressed emotion. Don't you dare talk to me about fair. Was it fair when you paid for her entire private college education, for her divorce from her first fiancé which she caused, but told me to get a loan for state school? Was it fair when you helped her buy a condo but never offered us a dime? Was it fair when she stole my ideas, my friends, my joy, and you called it sibling rivalry and told me to be the bigger person? I have been the bigger person my entire life, and all it got me was a smaller and smaller space to live in. I was on my feet now, pacing. I never asked for your money. I never asked for anything but to be seen as an equal. Clara and I did this all on our own. This house. I swept my arm around the room we had poured our blood and sweat into. We built this with our own 2 hands, and tonight she tried to take it. And you were both willing to stand by and let her. Clara stood up and put a gentle hand on my back. Leo, she said softly, her voice a calming balm. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the hurricane inside me. I'm sorry, I said, my voice hoarse, but I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that we are a happy, normal family. I need space, from both of you, and from her. My mother started crying again, this time with deep, wrenching sobs. Don't say that, Leo. Please. We love you. We're so proud of you. I know you do, I said, and it was the saddest truth in the world. But you love the idea of peace more. And for my entire life, peace has meant letting Amelia win, letting Amelia have her way, so she doesn't make a scene. I'm not setting myself on fire to keep you warm anymore. The game is over. They left soon after that, a heavy, unspoken chasm between us. There were no hugs, just a sorrowful look from my mother and a defeated slump in my father's shoulders. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a profound sense of loss, but also a sliver of relief. Clara and I spent the next hour cleaning up in silence, working in tandem, a familiar rhythm. As I scraped plates into the trash, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, bone deep and emotional. We had won. We had protected our home. But it felt like a hollow victory. The damage was done, and the wounds were deep, not just with Amelia, but with the very foundation of my family. The next day, the fallout began. My phone was flooded with texts from friends who had been at the party, all offering their support and expressing their shock. News travels fast in a small social circle. We learned through a mutual acquaintance that a for sale sign had gone up in front of Amelia and Richard's condo. Their planned 2-week vacation to Europe was abruptly canceled. The house of cards had well and truly collapsed. I also learned from my best friend, Ben, that this wasn't a spontaneous act of malice. Amelia had been planning it for months. She had been complaining to mutual friends about the unfairness of my situation, planting seeds of doubt, trying to build a narrative where she was the hero coming to the rescue of a poor, dementia-riddled old woman and her rightful heir. She had researched potential vulnerabilities, hired people, and spent money she didn't have, all in a desperate attempt to maintain her facade of success. The thought of that cold, calculated deception was somehow worse than the public outburst. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated attack on my life, on my character, on the one thing I had built that was truly mine. And as I stood on the porch of my beautiful, hard-won home, I realized that the battle for the house might be over, but the war for my own peace of mind was just beginning. 2 weeks after the disastrous party, 2 weeks of stilted, awkward phone calls from my parents and complete silence from my sister, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It's Amelia. Can we meet? Alone. My first instinct was to block the number, to delete the message and pretend it never existed. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her blame shifting. But Clara, in her infinite wisdom, saw me staring at the phone, my thumb hovering over the delete button. "Maybe you should," she said gently, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "Not for her, for you, so you can close this chapter and not let it fester." I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet, anonymous coffee shop in a strip mall halfway between my house and the city. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the corner, looking out the window. I barely recognized her. The usual designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, slightly frayed sweater and jeans. Her face was pale, without a trace of makeup, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. The confident, arrogant star I had known my whole life had vanished. In her place was a tired, defeated woman who looked her age for the first time. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at me. I just nodded, sitting down opposite her. The uncomfortable silence stretched on, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine. "Richard and I are separating," she said bluntly, still staring out the window. "We're filing for divorce. The condo is being sold to cover the debts. He can't forgive me. Not for the money, but for the humiliation. Image is everything to him, you know?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I guess it was everything to me, too." "I'm sorry to hear that, Amelia," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. There was no joy in her ruin, only a profound sadness. "I'm moving to Chicago," she went on, her voice flat. "I got a job offer there. It's a step down from what I was doing, a much lower salary, but it's a fresh start. A place where nobody knows me, where my name isn't mud." We sat in silence for a few minutes. I waited, knowing there was more. Finally, she turned from the window and looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and empty. "I know sorry isn't enough, Leo. I know what I did was monstrous. It was evil. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself." "Then why did you want to meet?" I asked, my voice even. She struggled for words, twisting a paper napkin in her hands until it shredded. I wanted you to know that it wasn't just about the money. Or the house. Not really." She took a shaky breath. I think I've always been jealous of you." I stared at her, completely baffled. The idea was so alien it felt like she was speaking another language. "Jealous? Of me? Amelia, you had everything. You were the one everyone adored. You got the praise, the attention, the new car, the college fund. I got things," she corrected me, her voice raw with an emotion I'd never heard from her before, vulnerability. "I got things, but you have a sense of self. You always knew who you were. You didn't need everyone's approval to feel good about yourself. You just quietly went about your life, building things, creating things, making a real life. I was so busy trying to win, I never stopped to figure out what I was even playing for. My whole life has been one big performance." She looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see a rival. I just saw my sister, lost and broken and terribly, terribly human. "I saw you with that house," she continued, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "You didn't just buy it. You brought it back to life with your own hands. You and Clara, you were so happy, so complete. And I was drowning. My business was failing. Richard and I were fighting all the time about money. That perfect life was a lie held together with credit cards and loans. And seeing your perfect, real life, it broke me. Felt like a judgment. I thought if I could just have that one thing, that beautiful house, I could fix everything. I could sell it, pay off the debts, and be the winner again. It was insane. I know that now. It wasn't a full apology. It was a confession, an explanation. It didn't excuse what she did, not by a long shot. But for the first time, it made a sliver of sense. It wasn't about me. It was all about her. It always had been. "I won't be pressing charges, Amelia," I said quietly. "Marcus Thorne wanted to, for the slander and the fraudulent documents. I told him no." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why?" "Because you're already living with the consequences," I said. "And because, Despite everything, you're still my sister. Go to Chicago. Build a new life. A real one this time. Stop performing. That was the last time I saw her in person. She moved away the following week. She and Richard finalized their divorce. She stayed in Chicago, and from what I hear through my parents, she's slowly, painfully, rebuilding her life. Our relationship remains distant, limited to polite, infrequent texts on birthdays and holidays. Her confession, however, had opened a door for me. It made me realize that my entire identity had been shaped in opposition to hers. I was the not Amelia, the quiet one because she was loud, the careful one because she was reckless, the artistic one because she was corporate. Her attempt to take my house had forced me to stand up for myself, and in doing so, it had started to unravel who I was without her as my counterpoint. On Clara's suggestion, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Evans. We talked for hours about my childhood, about the ingrained patterns of my family. He helped me see that my parents' favoritism wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their own issues and their admiration for a type of aggressive ambition they never had themselves. He helped me work through the anger and the hurt, to mourn the family I wished I had, and to start building a new sense of self, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's shadow. The process was slow and painful. It's not easy to rewire a brain that's been running on the same faulty software for 30 years. But with Clara's unwavering support and the quiet, steady comfort of the home we had fought so hard for, I started to heal. I was learning to take up space in the world, not as a reaction to my sister, but simply as myself, Leo. And that was a foundation no one could ever try to steal. A year passed. A year of quiet healing, of rebuilding, of finding a new normal. The house was no longer just a project or a symbol of a battle won. It was simply our home. It was filled with the smell of Clara's baking, the sound of music from my small studio in the attic, the sight of our little garden beginning to flourish, and the warmth of a life being lived authentically. We decided to host another gathering. Not a housewarming party, but what Clara called a house blessing. The guest list was small, intimate. Just Ben, my best friend since college, Marcus Thorne and Thomas Pendleton, who had become unlikely but dear friends, the Millers from next door, and a few others who had stood by us without question. My parents weren't there. Our relationship was still strained, a work in progress that required distance and careful, therapist-approved boundaries. They were learning slowly, but we weren't there yet. It was a perfect, crisp autumn afternoon. We gathered in the backyard, under the shade of a massive old oak tree whose leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red. There were no grand speeches, no drama, no tension. We just shared food from the grill, told stories, and laughed. Real, unburdened laughter. It was simple and it was beautiful. Mrs. Pendleton, looking healthier and happier than ever, sat in a comfortable chair, holding court and telling stories about the house in its heyday. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and a peaceful quiet had settled over the house, Clara and I stood on the wraparound porch, looking out at the quiet street. The air was cool, and the lights from our windows cast a warm, golden glow onto the lawn. "It's a good life, isn't it?" she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. "It's a real life," I said, "and it's our life." I thought about Amelia then, a fleeting, distant thought without the old sting. I hoped she was okay. I hoped she was finding her way, building something real for herself in Chicago. The anger was gone, replaced by a sort of distant, sad acceptance. Our paths had diverged so completely, and maybe that was for the best. Some things I was learning can't be fixed. They can only be survived. I realized that the biggest thing I had gained over the past year wasn't a house. It was freedom. Freedom from the competition. Freedom from the crippling need for my parents' approval. Freedom from the shadow that had followed me my entire life. My sister had tried to take my house, but in doing so, she had inadvertently given me back myself. The house was the catalyst, the crucible that had forced me to confront a lifetime of pain and emerge stronger, more whole on the other side. The future of my relationship with my family was still uncertain. Maybe one day we'd find a new way to be a family. Maybe not. But for the first time in my life, I was okay with that uncertainty. My foundation was no longer built on their approval or on anyone else's terms. It was built here on this porch with my wife beside me, in this house that was so much more than wood and nails. It was a testament to patience, to hard work, and to the quiet power of building a life on your own terms. And it was finally, completely mine. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had a moment in your life that changed everything and forced you to stand up for yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.